Advanced English Arabic Learning Session 90. A depression is a more severe downturn that lasts for years. There have been 33 recessions since 1854. There's been only one depression, the Great Depression, August 1929 March 1933. Smart money is cash invested or wagered by those considered experienced. The players were making caustic comments about the refereeing. Safety issues have been a sticking point in the negotiations. The length of the contract has become a sticking point in the negotiations. The main sticking point was the question of taxes. Leaders worked assiduously to hammer out an action plan. False reports were assiduously circulated by the intelligence department. She nursed him assiduously during an illness he had in 1765. The weather vane is a fine piece of 18th-century ironwork. The vain woman in front of me at the drive-through kept changing her order. Because Vera is vain, she is having a hard time finalizing her vacation plans. She is very vain about her long black hair. A vane of a windmill driven by wind. A blue vein throbbed in his forehead. Blood poured from the cut vein. When he shouted, the veins in his neck stood out clearly. She tugged at his collar and he tried in vain to rise. Tony Blair was so vain that all he could think about was the glory of the opening ceremony. To experience fun-filled opportunities. Organizers promised a fun-filled day with loads of entertainment for the whole family. The office gradually returned to a semblance of normality. The sense of normalcy faded as they moved through the mall. A return to normalcy after war. Memories of that evening were still vivid. The rhododendron bush provides a vivid splash of mauve. Blossoms with mauve and white petals. A few pale streaks of mauve were all that remained of the sunset. Their friendship blossomed into romance. A garden in which roses blossom. Her ample bosom. She had plucked the brooch from her bosom. He went home each night to the bosom of his family. Quivering dread was settling in her bosom. The two girls had become bosom friends, of a friend, very close or intimate. She gave a grimace of pain. I sipped the coffee and grimaced. His grimace produced a chuckle from Sarah. With a grimace, she dragged herself next to a tree stump and leaned against it, exhausted. An impetuous but controlled flow of water. The skyscrapers are not needed, they're just gimmicky. Gimmicky 3D effects. We don't like strangers who poke their noses into our affairs. You shouldn't go sticking your nose into other people's business. My neighbor is meddlesome and has a tendency to poke his nose in everything I do. It's very easy to yield to temptation and spend too much money. New methods have yielded promising results in the field. Love will not yield to all the might of wealth. The courts should not yield to temptation for two reasons. We've lived here for years, but now it's time to pull up stakes. His father wrangled with a foreman and the family pulled up stakes. The youngest stopper to keep a clean sheet in 3 consecutive games. Germany, who were beaten by world champions France in their opener, will take on Hungary. While we're in Australia, we're hoping to squeeze in a trip to the Barrier Reef. If you are ever asked to accompany someone down the aisle, you should feel deeply honored and privileged to play that part. When the bride walks down the aisle, also called the processional. I never thought you'd be the first one to walk down the aisle. The aisle is the passage down the middle of a church between the two blocks of seats. She became a mother within a year of walking down the aisle. Necrosis is often used by pathologists to support the diagnosis of a malignant, cancerous, tumor. Gangrene happens when tissues in your body die after a loss of blood caused by illness. The target has to be accretive to us and to our clients. I had to strap the bag to my bicycle. The name bass covers a range of fishes. Mighty oaks from little acorns grow. I went to a fraternity kegger. Kegger is a large party at which beer is served from a keg, typically attended by students or young people. Attaboy, that's the boy, an informal expression of encouragement or admiration to a man or boy. Damage is the gist of the action, and without it the plaintiff must fail. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. The brook whelmed up from its source, welled up. What does "it's time to pay the piper" mean? Monogamy in humans is beneficial because it increases the chances of raising offspring. Serial monogamy is actually very rare in mammals. Pegasus is a mythical winged divine horse, and one of the most recognized creatures in Greek mythology. I'd like the issue to be tabled for the next few months. That was the cost of swanning along on the gondolas. A sugar crash is the sudden drop in energy levels after consuming a large amount of carbs, such as pasta, pizza, and desserts. He refused to answer questions in order not to incriminate himself. He was booed and heckled when he tried to address the demonstrators. Several protesters were heckling the speaker at the rally. The players were being heckled by the fans. A cohort of civil servants patiently drafting legislation. If a newt's leg is amputated, it will grow a new one. He and his wife had been growing apart for at least a year. A grouch is a cranky person who complains a lot. You could describe your grumpy old grandpa as a grouch. The actress had been given her role only as a tryout. If you give something a tryout, you try it or test it to see how useful it is. Their opposition to planning for full employment was a lost cause. His condition had given no cause for concern. The rule that no man should be a judge in his own cause. Morels is a widely distributed edible fungus. They booed and hissed when he stepped on stage. We will not shirk from closing a school if the evidence should justify it. Erotomaniacs are convinced that the person they have fixated on loves them in return. A 10-year-old pyromaniac, a person suffering from pyromania. Speak of the devil. We were just talking about you. They maintained that the drugs had been planted on them. He managed to plant an agent in his war council. Your mucus plug is a protective collection of mucus in the cervical canal during pregnancy. The cervix secretes a thick, jelly-like fluid to keep the area moist. Anchovies are a small shoaling fish of commercial importance as a food fish and as bait. We bought batteries for the radio and a few other odds and ends. The people waiting to use the computers were giving me the stink eye. It is very easy to get to the top of any employment structure if you are prepared to sell your soul. He knows he should see a doctor, but he's dragging his feet. The government has dragged its heels over permanent legislation. They dragged their feet through the orchard towards the house. To patronize someone in a condescending way is to treat them as if they're in need of help. An alderman is an elected member of a city council. The faithful could hear the minister dilate on the role religion could play. Lamaze is a method of childbirth involving exercises and breathing control to give pain relief without drugs. These fish can safely be released to shoal with most adult species. She zoned out during the lecture because it was so boring. A place where dull people lead uneventful lives. Mulligan is a stew made from odds and ends of food. The team were sitting on their lead and taking care to avoid turnovers. Turnover grew to more than $100,000 within 3 years. Flash in the pan, a sudden spasmodic effort that accomplishes nothing. I may trot round to the market for vegetables, go or walk briskly. They were tootling along the coast road, travel in a leisurely way. They would go for a drink and then toddle off home. She was lucky to never experience any animosity when she was breastfeeding her toddlers in public. The plan fell through because they hadn't thought it through properly. The fuselage tapers sharply towards the tail. I can't put a tail on him, I don't know where he's gone. The chances of heads and tails in the long run are equal. A flock of paparazzi had tailed them all over London. Cooking the sugar to caramel gives tack to the texture. A piece of tubing was used to siphon petrol. Dad warned us to steer clear of Dr. Smith and his poor advice. The children stayed up until way past their bedtime. Fumigate or disinfect a house with sulfur or other fumes. The outbreak has the potential to become a full-blown pandemic. Stolen cows were spirited away some distance to prevent detection. The numbers of devout travelers have dropped to a trickle. People began to slowly trickle out of the dining hall. Their confessions were allegedly coerced by torture. There were sweaty bodies everywhere bumping and grinding to the music. He just prattled on instead of giving a straight answer. She began to prattle on about her visit to the dentist. She wore an outfit she'd always wanted to try but felt she was too plump to risk. Stewardess is a woman employed to look after the passengers on a ship or aircraft. A turf war between attorneys and brokers has simmered for more than 20 years. The cat was lapping up a saucer of milk. If you don't allow alcohol to be served at a stadium, fans will just go out and binge drink before the game. The area will become too gentrified. From that day on, we was always together like peas and carrots. The earnest money shall be enclosed along with the sealed tender documents. The squirrels ravaged the saplings, despite the baited traps. Signs of being roofied include extreme drowsiness and even amnesia. Bursary is a grant, awarded to someone to enable them to study at university. She had spent that morning mucking out the stables. The urban crisis conflates a number of different economic and social issues. The park has been zoned into 4 distinct bioregions. No matter what the government calls them, they are cuts. Rivers were the primal highways of life. The end. Coming next. Session 91.